This is just me. Okay. So if we can get people filtered back to their seats. So I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Maybe a few of you were able to get outside and see the sun. Not usually a problem here in Baltimore, but you know, we haven't seen the sun in a week, actually. So it's kind of disappointing to come after a week of rain and gray. It's kind of frustrating to be in a room without windows on a nice sunny day. But so I mentioned this morning that we weren't going to do many presentations. I am now going to renege on that. We are going to do take a look at discovery from a couple different perspectives. From the perspectives of the publishing community, the library community, and some of the issues that we touched on a little bit this morning, just to provide some context for some of the roundtable conversations that we're going to engage in this afternoon and tomorrow. I really appreciate those of you who took a few minutes and wrote down some midterm issues. Looks like we have lots of them. We only have 10 tables, so I think we're set with the midterm issues. We have 3 Horizon issues. I think maybe some of the midterm issues could get bounced over to Horizon issues. And if there are other ideas or themes or topics, maybe we can consolidate some as we move forward. For those of you on the live stream, apologies for the little bit, call it a hiccups this morning. Makes me really appreciate all of the work that goes into, say, broadcasting an NFL football game live. But, you know, we don't have quite the same resources as, say, Fox or CBS. But one of the things that those on the virtual stream will have the opportunity to do during the roundtable discussions, we will focus the camera on one of the tables, and we will sort of democratically vote using a SurveyMonkey survey for those on the live stream. So we don't have the survey up yet, so when we do during the next break, I'll share with you the URL. It's a short URL, so once we get the survey up with the topics, you can then vote on that SurveyMonkey survey, and then we will situate that table in such a way that we can broadcast that. If you're really interested in that topic, don't feel shy about participating in that table if you're in the room. But that's how we're going to handle, since we can't live stream 10 different conversations simultaneously. We're not quite there yet. But we can at least do one, and that's how we're going to select the one that we're going to broadcast. So let's get started with this afternoon's programs. Our first speaker today is Karen McKeown, who's Director of Product Discovery, Usage and Analytics at Gale Gengage. So, Karen.
Thanks, Todd. Am I? Okay. I am very happy to be here with my esteemed colleagues and as well as many of you here in the room and those here virtually joining us. my job at Gale is to focus on discovery, really from the wider context of library discovery services is a part of that, but being a part of Gengage Learning, we also have a heavy focus on the classroom as well as open web. So I wanted to talk about each of those three areas today, and the title of the presentation, A Billion Lessons Learned, kind of comes from, I think we're all come at this topic with some angst that is all kind of from our different perspectives. But I think what, from Gale's perspective, some of the challenges have been over the year, we were really one of the first to be a participant with library discovery services and have expanded that significantly. And we do work with all the major players. And that means, Steve Gutman was talking about some of the challenges of working with the metadata, with the different databases, with the different platforms, and all those complexities. So we multiply that 4 times over. So that's where the billion comes from, is we really, at this point, have shared over 1 billion documents in being able to do what needs to be done with library discovery. So with that, I need the clicker. Where did that? Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'd like to lend a little bit of perspective. From the student perspective, I think it's good news, and I think this puts some context on the whole area of discovery, is that there is certainly a value that they feel for the library and its services. And 90% of college students, and this came out of a survey that Gale did called the Gale Student Engagement Survey, and we surveyed 3,000 students and 700 faculty in the spring of this year. And this is just a few of the highlights. You can find the whole study on our website. But I pulled out a few things that I thought were pertinent for us to think about in the realm of discovery. And that's that students have a good association with the library. Only 75% of them say they wish they took more advantage of the library and its resources, but 70% of them don't ask for help. So I see a lot of you nodding your heads that this probably resonates with some of the what you see and experience every day. So I think that there are certainly some challenges in being discovered that represents. Couple that with this notion that, I don't know how many of you know the publication Time Out, which started in London with the circulation, subscribed circulation, about 45,000. They now are an open web property that has 49 billion viewers. And essentially their motto is, good stuff finds me. So that's, it arrives when I need it. So at Gale, we think about providing access at the right place, at the right time, and that means for us, currently we're focusing classroom, open web, and the library. So first I'll cover the first two, and then we can dig into a little more detail since this is more focused on the library discovery. So many of you know we are a part of Gengage Learning, and Gengage Learning is doing all kinds of interesting things with education technology. One of them is MindTap. MindTap is a platform that is in the classroom hosting the text and has lots of applications that are provided for the instructor and the student around that, including assessment and outcomes and all of that. So what we're looking at doing is, what we're finding is that when we marry up library resources with those kinds of tools, things get better. And what I mean by that is particularly when they are wedded to assignments. We know that, yes, we do put search boxes there and make it easier for if it's a US history class, to get into the US history and context product. But where we really start seeing the impact is when it's wedded with the assignments. And then you start seeing really cool things like this that are being created as part of those assignments. This is an assignment that was done in a US history class where the students went into ECHO, one of our primary source databases, not heavily used. The students then curated a Pinterest site and were able to comment on these images that they found and create this board. So I think this kind of engaged learning is exactly the kind of thing that we can put forth when we marry up library resources into the classroom like this. So if you're interested in learning more, we do have a demo on our website of how to embed, this is the Artemis product, how to embed that with MindTap. So what we see as the outcome is that usage increases. In many cases, it hit, like in a primary source document, it hit a high level of usage that it had never achieved before. In other instances, we were able to introduce a new database, and within 6 weeks, it was at the 90th percentile versus a similar institution in terms of usage. So it does drive usage in the way that we like to measure it. Student engagement. When we ask students what they thought of the course, the engagement, the ratings that they give are much higher. The faculty feel like their students are much more engaged. And we feel like it does have a lasting effect because to the extent that in some of these undergrad courses that the instructors are introducing the resources, then they come back and they use them. So this is another benefit. Another thing that we're doing is integration with Google, and many of you may have seen a press release, may have experienced this firsthand. This is, we first introduced it in one of our in-context products, and you'll see at the top there's a Google sign-in. And you sign in to Google, and you're able to then save things to Google Drive, so this begins that integration with Google Education that is happening everywhere and growing like crazy. So the integration with Google Classroom, there's a way that you can share within the Google Hangouts as well. So we make this all very easy from the library database. And last, Google Scholar. Many of you mentioned, Google Scholar is indeed a tool that is being used, and we are opening up our content for indexing by Google Scholar. We make it easy to authenticate users in that are subscribed to your library resources. So it should be driving usage, it should drive discovery, should drive access. So now I wanted to turn the focus more to library discovery services, and I think of this as being sort of the 4 C's: content, compliance, communication, and collaboration. In terms of content, what we've done over the last year is increase the number of databases that are covered in the discovery services from 5 to 41. That means that we've shared over 1 billion documents to be able to do that just in the last year alone. So Gale, at this point, is among the top providers of content in most every discovery service, I think. Most of our, and these are the partners here are the ones that we primarily partner with. The coverage does vary, and what we have done that had been quite confusing to know who has which products, so we are making it very public. There is a list, and there's a list as to whether or not it's full text indexing or metadata indexing. So this is all available on our Gale.com discovery site because we want, shouldn't be a secret, and in fact ODI compliance recommends that it's not. So we did, along with IEEE and SAGE, lead the way in announcing ODI compliance. We feel like that really brings that kind of collaboration, sort of the industry standards, the support of that, the direction that we really need to have in order to be able to work across, since we're working with multiple folks to make this happen. That standardization really helps. And I think it will help, as we were talking earlier, for folks who may not have the technology resources, other publishers who really can't have a big staff to figure this out. I think those standards really do indeed help. So we have published our standards, and we put all of this on a website that we didn't have until recently. And again, we wanted things to be very transparent. And we wanted one place to go for you to be able to find out what we do in terms of discovery. So on this site, you will find not only that partnership list that indicates who has which databases and what method of indexing that they're using, but with the compliance checklist is there. And another thing that we're developing is guides that are optimized, that indicate how to optimize Gale content within each of the discovery partners, because it It is different for each partner. We heard about the merged record that ProQuest has, but that's a little bit different. There are features on the ProQuest interface, for example, that surface our reference content really well, something called the Topic Explorer and a database recommender. So there are features like that that you can take advantage of that don't come out of the box, that we feel like if you're looking to enhance a user experience and Gale fits in helping you do that, then we want to make sure that your database administrator, your discovery administrator knows how to do that. We also, on this page, we want to make it really easy to find the kind of resources that it takes to manage discovery. So the title list linkages are there, the MARC record links, as well as links to some of the discovery tools, like we have widgets, for example, that can be embedded into the library management, the LMS systems. So those are all possible. So it's all there, Gale.com discovery. The two things that we did after we expanded our content, we turned our attention to making it better. And this is really quality of the user experience. We wanted to enhance that. So we made the rounds and talked to each of our partners in depth about some of the issues that we were seeing. We analyzed our support tickets that were coming in. And we found two areas that we really wanted to dig into. One was linking, and the other was the title lists. Because if these two things are broken, it seemed like it was accounting to about 60% of the issues that we were seeing. So we dug into this. We have two solutions that we're in the midst of offering. One is called Gale Direct Linking, and the other is the KBART title list, which we're adopting those standards. What direct linking does, many of you are familiar with the inbound open URL link. So when the discovery service is actually sending us the link from the user has clicked on it, it constructs this complex link. If there is one thing broken in it, it fails. And there are things that we have done in our systems to try to engineer around this logic, like fallback logic and that sort of thing. But that, although it returns results, often has the side effect of sending users a full page of things when they just wanted the article. So if we start stripping off some of that data that's sent along with that query, then you still get an unintended result. So we felt like engineering in more of that kind of logic was not the solution. So we jumped to something called direct links. And at this point, we have direct links available for all of our articles. ProQuest has adopted the direct linking, and EBSCO, OCLC, and Xlibris are in the midst of doing it. And you can see what it does is it directs, it's sort of like DOI in that it directs to a specific document because there is a numeric identifier for the document. So it's a very easy change for the, easy for me to say, for the discovery service to make, but it is something that we think inbound open URL linking is, there's published studies on that. We actually did a study where we looked at 1,000 links and a third of them were failing. So that's the source of a lot of the links. This other thing is that, again, standards coming in to guide us. KBART, another NISO initiative, puts title lists in a format that can be consumed better by the systems that you have in place. So we are moving to KBART title lists. We have completed a first version of that, and we expect to complete the rest of it by the end of the year. So on our title list now, you'll see KBART, and it is in KBART format. What it does is, what we'll do by the end of the year, it doesn't cover some of the specialty content like multimedia and that sort of thing. So we're kind of leading the way and have some recommendations for KBART on how to handle that, and we're going to make that available so that we'll be completely off. In fact, we're going to go to essentially 2 formats from 6 for our title lists. So I just wanted to sum up that, discovery, we look at it from the broader perspective. It's really has to be it's all about making for better usage, better access, better experience. So that means we're thinking about the classroom, the open web, as well as library discovery services. So any questions?
There was. Oh, sorry.
Hi, Andrew Harmon from Endocrine Society. We're sitting at the same
I know,
table.
we're sitting next to each other.
Uh,
That's for all the virtual people.
right. This change to the direct link, are you still able to track all those variables that go into the open URL you were showing us before?
We actually end up tracking even better with each of in the past it's been very difficult for us to, for example, to know once you're at a product level, how much usage is coming in from discovery. And we're able, with the introduction of the direct links, each of the discovery partners is actually identifying themselves to us so that we know where the usage is coming from, we know what they were searching, and that numeric link tells us everything we need to know about the title. So it will not impact, I think, is your question about would it impact counter reports and things like that?
Well, that and your own metrics, like the things you want to you want to track about the people and where the sources of your traffic and things like that.
We're actually getting better tracking internally because of this.
Hi, Laura Dorico from ASTM International. When you created those direct links, what was the process as far as how long did it take you to do that? And then how are you delivering the direct links? Are you putting it into some type of FTP? Like, how is that being transferred?
Let me take your question a step at a time. So direct links was something that we actually had document identifiers for all of our documents, so it was just a matter of bringing that into the linkages, or into the links. And so what we will do, first step was to make library discovery better, and so we shared those links with our partners. And so that was the first step, is just making our partners aware of and adopting these links. The next step is we will develop title level direct links, and those are going into our KBART lists, so that will enhance the ability to get to the titles. And then from that, our MARC records will also adopt that linkage. So it kind of is being rolled out in stages, but for us it was not. We do T-shirt sizing on projects, and it was probably a small to medium.
There's actually a new work item that the Discovery to Delivery Topic Committee is undertaking about the referral data that's passed along with open URLs. And I believe that's going out to the members for a vote in the next week or so, thereabouts, next week, to help formalize this as part of the open URL standard. Any other comments, questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned that metadata and the linking were 60% of the problem. What were the other 40%?
There's always, there's always cleanup to be had with records. So I think that will persist, is that there are always, titles change. You'll, realize that there's missing metadata. It looks like there's a missing issue, but was it because the publication discontinued? All of those kind of cataloging headaches. So that is a persistent portion of the others. And then sometimes it's like user setup or something administratively that could be a bit off. And then we, tend to work with our counterparts in the discovery service to pinpoint, the fixes for that. And then the user guide should help with that as well. So those are kind of a couple of the other big areas. And then I think that's mostly it.
And for those on the live stream, we can also take questions from you all, either via, I think we're monitoring Twitter as well as the social stream that's associated with the live stream. So if anyone on the live stream has any questions, you can also ping us that way as well. Juliana Arnetti, anyone? Okay.
Please point the mic in your mouth. Please use the mic. Okay. Is this better?
What was? All right, here.
This is Letty Conrad with Sage. Just through the Twitter stream, there's a question about how, and I'm assuming she's asking about the link resolution work, your direct links, how that works with the proxy server. Do you know
Ooh.
how that would?
Can I call in an expert? Do I get a lifeline?
Lifeline?
I would have to check on that, quite honestly. I have some ideas running through my head, but I'd want to check first. Yeah. And we can put that on the Gale.com discovery site.
Okay.
Well, great. I'm glad to be here and glad to be joining the ODI Standing Committee. And yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate your talk. There we go. Our next presenter is Gregg Gordon, who is president of the Social Science Research Network, SSRN. He's going to be talking about serendipitous discovery and maybe even some non-textual discovery as well. So, Gregg?
Is this on? We're good? Sounds good. Good? Okay. So I think I kind of got merged in the middle here right after lunch between a couple of really nice informative talks to just kind of talk about something completely not technical. Maybe keep everybody awake for a little bit and hopefully leave with more questions than answers. So we started talking with Juliana at ALA or some other event, and she said, we're doing this thing, and it's kind of cool, and Marshall did this paper, and would you want to come and talk, and do you have anything that you could actually talk about? And I said, well, I actually was thinking about this stuff called serendipitous discovery, and she goes, oh, what a great topic. Completely sight unseen, absolutely no idea what the heck I was talking about, but she said it sounded pretty cool. So when I think about serendipitous discovery, it's kind of in this place where we're like so forced with so much stuff to search. And what I want us to think about for the next 25 minutes or so is not about search, but about finding stuff. Kind of stumbling upon things, kind of finding things that actually matter but you didn't know existed. So kind of what we don't know, we don't know. And I actually wrote a little paper for Against the Grain a couple of years ago, and I talked about finding things, and finding things from a social science and humanities perspective versus an STM perspective. And in this little paper I wrote about that in STM, it's kind of like a rifle shot, right? I'm looking for the cause of this or the cure for that, but it's that single bullet. And in the social sciences and humanities, it's more like a shotgun blast. I see a whole bunch of pellets, and I observe what's happening. 50 people walk in the room, and 20 go left, and 10 go right, and a couple stumble. and I'm observing what's happening. And then again, in the STM space, since there's a lot of money in medicine and other areas like that, it's very, very cloistered research. I keep it close. I don't tell people about what I'm doing until I'm absolutely, positively ready to tell them. And over in the SSNH space, it's much more about sharing and telling people and more browsing versus search, if you want to think of it that way. And over here in the SSNH space, most of the scholars that I deal with at the Social Science Research Network the top scholars make more money writing and expert witnessing and doing those kind of things than they actually do teaching. They don't have large, well-funded labs in the same way you do in STM. So there is some contrast here, and the paper talks a little bit about it. But what it talks about is more thinking about how we find stuff that we didn't know really existed or didn't even know that we knew we needed to know. So again, we're thinking about serendipitous discovery in this search world. So let me just take just a minute or two and tell you about SSRN. So since I'm 100% certain everybody can read, basically we're a repository, but the most important thing up here is the last item. What SSRN tries to do is level the playing field. I don't care if you're at Harvard or Harvard or Humperdinck Community College. If you have an idea, you can share it at SSRN. We strongly support open access. And we support open access by allowing people to submit for free and download for free. And it's this sharing of ideas, this cross-pollination of ideas that we think helps create cool, innovative research faster. We've got a bunch of authors, about 300,000 of them. So we get about another 2,300 new authors contributing to the system every single month. And since we're talking about discovery, I chose to use a Wordle, which we all know is the absolute worst way to discover any possible piece of information known to mankind. Because you can't even see 2/3 of the countries that are listed up there. But we pulled out the US and the UK, and here's basically a smattering of all of the places in the world. It's about 153 countries where authors live that have contributed content to SSRN. And we're very, very proud of that. Because again, in this cross-pollination of ideas, we think it's important to actually consider geography to be a basis for cross-pollination. So I gave a keynote in Chennai about 2 years ago now. And after I sat down with some faculty, and they were excited. We had a really nice time. They said, well, you know, but Greg, I'm writing about the slums in Mumbai. It doesn't really apply. And I said, well, last I checked, there's actually some slums and ghettos and favelas around the world. So yes, maybe the inputs are going to be different, and the conclusions would be different, but it's that core concept, that script, that algorithm, that core knowledge base inside of the research that actually applies everywhere where you're trying to tackle similar kinds of problems. So how do we start to build upon each other's ideas? How do we start to cross-pollinate those ideas? So from a geography standpoint, we encourage people from around the world. From a submission standpoint, let me come back to that. So from a submission standpoint, we actually allow the authors to contribute content into a dozen different areas in SSRN. So when you submit, it's not a one-for-one. It's not I write something about Sarbanes-Oxley as an accountant. It goes into a financial accounting e-journal. It can go into managerial accounting. It can go into regulatory securities. It can go into sustainability, corporate governance, et cetera, up to a dozen different areas, so that the lawyers see the way the accountants think, and the accountants see the way the lawyers think. It's this cross-pollination of ideas based on discipline, based on geography, and based on a number of other factors. So my simple definition of innovation is to create something new by being exposed to a broader, deeper set of existing things. And that's what we're trying to do, is create this broad, deep set of existing things so that I can find stuff, so I can create cool, innovative research faster, so we can all benefit by that set of activities. So this is a study we do at the end of the year. So this is from 2011. And what you'll see very subtly is that when we did it in 2013, we just haven't done 2015 yet, you'll see that the blue, which is the US, goes a little bit smaller, which you would expect. But what you probably didn't see is actually that India jumped up quite a bit and Japan jumped onto the list. And so what we're seeing is, because we have a lot of content, because we expose it in a little bit different ways, because we strongly support open access, we're seeing countries like India that don't have a lot of money to be spending on research and content acquisition coming to SSRN to find things. But what we also see is Japan, who actually has a lot more money per capita than India, obviously, but also they're starting to see the way that they can share information, starting to see the benefits of geography as it comes to discovery, as they're starting to find things that they wouldn't necessarily find by looking in their narrow, traditional pathways for accessing information. And that's what we find really, really cool and interesting, because it starts to show that people actually are getting benefits from SSRN. So I talked about papers. We have about 65, 70,000 submissions. We have about 600,000 papers in the library. But again, you can cross-pollinate those across the 27 or 28 now networks of disciplines that we cover. You can push your ideas into these different pathways. Now, we'll talk about metrics in a moment. And because people realize that the more places I put things, the more downloads or citations I get, we actually have to be a little bit careful about controlling them. Most of them are pretty good about it, but we do have a few authors who think that what they wrote actually should go in all 1,000 e-journals and can't understand why we actually hold them back. But, you know, macroeconomics is generally not considered to be a music research and composition subtopic. Now, this is a slide I show because I'm actually, it shows me, one, it shows just that I'm not very smart at times, but two, it shows kind of an interesting way that we think about the content within SSRN. So what you have here are a bunch of blue dots, which are daily submissions, and a bunch of red dots, which are daily revisions. So you see in the fall of 2007, we actually opened up the e-library to allow revisions. So it's a living, breathing corpus of information. I put an idea up there, I evolve the idea, I grow it, I move it forward. I actually put up a published paper, and there's post-publication comments and maturity and evolution of that idea. And then I stopped the chart in April of 2012. And the reason I stopped that chart is because you can barely see it, but just right over there, we actually had a day where there was more revisions than new submissions. And it was a turning point for us because what we realized was that this is a living, breathing corpus of information. It's not some static, printed out copy that's sitting on some shelf somewhere. This is living, breathing information. And when you start to think about living, breathing information, search kind of starts to fall apart, right? I have to be evolving it because I can't be looking for something that existed at one point in time. I have to be thinking about the flow of ideas and the flow of information as it occurs over time. Now just sit with that for a second. That becomes a real problem now, right? Because now I can't just say I read the article. Now I have to think about the article's life. And what else did it touch? And it forced us to think about things a bit differently. So when you want a very simple picture of SSRN, this is it. We let 1,000 flowers bloom. That's what we try to do. We don't care where you are or what you're writing about. If it's good and impactful and can help somebody see things differently, we want it. Now, any of you who have gardens know that the moment you have a garden, you have another thing that comes in with gardens. Pests and weeds. So it used to be really, really simple. I mean, I actually had a CompuServe email account at one point in time, and I actually said to the woman who got me that access to that email account, I said, why don't I get more email? Why don't I get more email? I don't have any email. Nobody knows about this. There was actually a point in time when we waited by the mailbox for a journal to come because it was the way we would get information. We wanted that journal. Scarcity is not the issue anymore, right? We actually have these floodgates of information. So normally what I ask right now is, how many of you read everything in your field? How many of you have something clue what everything in your field is? We have this horribly wonderful problem called information overabundance. And when we think about information overabundance, we start to think, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff that I have to try to get my arms around that I will never, ever, 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 ever get my arms around. Guy Kawasaki years ago gave me one of the most freeing comments that I ever had. And he said, once a year you should actually corrupt your inbox. And he said it was okay. So Clay Shirky would say that it's actually not information overabundance, it's filter failure. Well, you know what? That gets us back to the search problem. And search is great, and search is wonderful. What we're here to talk about right now is actually something different than that. We're talking about how do I find the stuff that I don't know actually exists. So SSRN in its infinite wisdom said, well, here, we're going to make it better for you. So we came up with a couple of metrics that a lot of people use. So we have downloads. We spent a lot of time, money, and effort making sure that our downloads are valid and verified so that they actually can be used for ranking. And we believe that downloads are a wonderful metric for what is current, what is a hot paper, stuff that hasn't yet had time to be cited, something that is being talked about, something that is you want to know what's the latest and greatest in this area, or what's the most downloaded paper in this area for the last month or 2 months, or whatever the case may be. Since we do a lot of open access stuff, we actually created a technology called SiteReader with our friends at ITX, a development firm that we used. And they actually do this really, really cool stuff that I can't exactly explain. But effectively what it does is it breaks apart the PDF into its component parts and then does some interesting mathematical parsing and matching. And then we actually have human beings, yes, human beings, in Argentina and India, verify each and every single one of the citations. So we built tools to allow them to quickly go through this. And the reason is we wanted them to be 99.9997% accurate so that you could rely on them, so that you could use them, so that it cost money, but it made sense for us to do that. And citations are a great metric for figuring out what really matters to somebody. Somebody actually took the time to find it, reference it, and then figure out some sort of system to make it work inside their bibliography that somebody then completely changed when it was published. We also use a thing called eigenfactor. We work very closely with Bergstrom and West up at the University of Washington. And depending on how much you know about eigenfactor, in the traditional metrics, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. In eigenfactor, using the eigenvector, it basically is a mathematical round robin between all of the nodes in the network that it touches. So it's a different way to look deeper inside of the relationships between one paper and another and the connections within those nodes so that people better understand how something influences something else. I'll come back to this relationship methodology because this is something that I think is actually part of this future that we're all talking about. Now, I gave a talk at ACRL earlier in the year, and I was invited by these folks who are doing this e-browsing project, Kate, Nina, and Steve. And you're welcome to go look at what they're doing. And what they're doing is trying to figure out how this impacts the libraries in a much more knowledgeable way than I could ever do that. But they're talking about not just running down the search path. Let's take a step back and think about browsing as opposed to search. What are the benefits of both, and how do we start to build tools that actually allow us to work within these confines to the betterment of both tools and technologies? And in the conversations with them, I said, okay, but what can I get out of this? And so I started thinking a lot about the roles as it relates to discovery, as it relates to browsing, as it relates to serendipitous discovery. And the first thing I thought about was the role that SSRN plays in this. So here's a simple little abstract page within SSRN land. The first thing that we added on here a couple of years ago was tabs. We did some UX testing at the University of Rochester. And what we found was that people would come in, they would find something, they would download the PDF, and they would immediately scroll through it, quickly checking the figures and graphs, but ultimately going down to the reference section of the paper to determine whether they wanted to read the paper or not. So we said, we can build the tool. The SiteReader tool allowed us to build the connections. We built it, so now we actually show you right on the page. You don't have to download the paper. You actually can go right here and look at the references of that paper without having to download the PDF. Now, yes, it may cost downloads if downloads is the metric that you're counting, but what we're talking about is creating cool new research faster, not counting downloads. So this allows you to very quickly see what papers influence this paper. And the next piece would be the citation tab, which is what papers were influenced by that paper. Now, fine, great, references and citations, we use those all the time. But what this does for us is it allows you to see the thread. Because when I talk to researchers, a lot of times they say, well, you know, this paper's kind of close. What was it influenced by? So let's look at the references and quickly allow me to link to wherever those papers are. And what did it influence? So as I think about this flow through the literature, backwards and forwards, and making it as simple and easy as possible, I allow the researcher maybe to find the paper they didn't know existed, to find the paper that actually is the paper that they want to use in their references for their paper that will influence their research. So it's this flow through the literature that we're talking about. This is from Carl and Jevon, Bergstrom and West. And this is actually a representation of JSTOR data. So what they did was they took the corpus of a section of JSTOR, looked at the citations and the references, and built, based on the corpus, a set of relationships not based on classification or traditional taxonomies. So you have a set of connections here that are based on the information itself. Regardless of what Gregg says it should be or where it should be classified or keyword, it's based on the relationships of the information itself. So you start to build these relationship methodologies that allow us to find things and connect things that aren't based on what we would maybe think traditionally we should do it or how we should do it. It gives us a different way to look at things. So one of the things that it does is it kind of starts to tear off our ontological constraints, the blinders that we all come to something, we say, well, it's got to be this way because it's always been this way for me. So it helps us to think about these problems a little bit differently. The piece of this that then comes from that we're starting to play around with, this is a, I don't know, I'll say beta, but my technology people say alpha, but whatever it is. But somewhere in this technological landscape thing that we're working on, is to take these relationships and actually allow me to say, who am I? So if I base the relationships on the data that I have and the relationships that exist, I now can start to do this recommendation engine where I'm an expert in this field. I know what I'm talking about. I want something really deep and meaty. Or I'm not an expert in this field. Give me the quintessential papers that I need to know. They call that the classics section. I'm looking at a new area of research. Help me find the classics. What should I know going into this? What's hot? Obviously, that is more component on the currency of downloads or citations. And serendipitous. Let me just kind of randomly walk through the woods of this research area to see something that I maybe wouldn't find if I just looked at the top-ranked papers or the top-ranked authors. Help me find something new and a little bit different. So we're starting to build out, as a content provider, these tools to help people discover things differently. Not that search is bad, but there's a different way to be thinking about this. And I think if we don't think about this, that we run the risk of actually losing this as we all chase for efficiency and effectiveness. But it doesn't stop there. We have a responsibility as content providers, but you know what? The person on the other end of the pipe has a responsibility too. So I wrote a little blog post when I was working with these guys at for the ACRL talk earlier today. And we don't have time to get into it today, but there's a whole bunch of really, really interesting information, actual research, crazy as we may call it, on luck. And there's a bunch of research, Richard Weissman, I believe his name is, University of Hertfordshire. He's done a whole bunch of research on luck, and he comes up with these components of what makes us feel lucky, and how do we feel lucky, and how is luck contained inside of research, and blah, 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 blah. And it's interesting stuff unto itself. But the first rule is being open to the possibility. So the first rule of luck, research, is you got to be open to the possibility that you actually could be lucky. So the person on the other end of the screen, the researcher, the scholar, the reader, they have to be open to the possibility that they're going to find something. And the second thing from this guy, Louis Pasteur, who you may have heard of, is you have to be prepared. You actually have to make a little bit of an effort to be prepared. I have to be ready for the ball to drop in my lap. So when we talk about serendipitous discovery at SSRN, we don't talk about just what we can do. We actually talk about what they can do too. So there's a responsibility on both sides. We have roles and responsibilities in all the stuff that we do, but they have to be ready for something to happen They have to be willing to make the effort to be lucky, to serendipitously discover something that they didn't know existed. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is the master lock that won the 2012 Industrial Design Award. Now, anybody that has ever been to school and had a combination lock knows how fun those are. So Master Lock in 2012 created a new combination lock. And you put your thumb on it, and you go up, up, down, down, left, right, whatever it is, like it's a joystick, and it unlocks the lock. Now, I know that it was a successful design because there's a pink ribbon version. And they don't put pink ribbons on anything. They put pink ribbons on everything. But they have a pink ribbon version, so I know that it's a successful design. And the most important aspect here is that it's a different way to think about a damn combination lock. I mean, how hard is it to just think about doing this with your thumb, up, up, down, down, left, left, right, right, and you're done, instead of spinning it to the left twice and to the right, whatever the number of times it is. So the final thought I'd like to leave you with is that maybe scholarly research just has a bad user interface. Maybe, just maybe, we're thinking about things a little bit wrong. And now, I was told that I would have my notes because I want to read you a quote right now, but I don't, so I'll tell you how it works. So, Brett Victor writes for Fast Company, a magazine that some of you, I'm sure, have heard of. And what he said was, about a year and a half ago, he said that think about multiplying Roman numerals. When we use Roman numerals, multiplication was for the demigods of math. I mean, it makes my head spin just thinking about V1 time. It's almost impossible, right? The moment we went to Arabic numerals, math became simple. My 9-year-old son can do it in his sleep. Numbers didn't change. The interface changed. So whereas it was virtually impossible to multiply Roman numerals, it's now simple and easy. So the final thought I want to leave you with is maybe we just need to think about the interface more and the technology less. And maybe by taking off those ontological constraints, we can find some of the solutions that are already out there. But because we're all overworked with too many emails, trying to do too many things, we're just not seeing it. Thank you, Juliana and Nettie and Todd. I think we may have a couple minutes for questions.
Questions for Gregg? Yep.
Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm at Valdosta State. And you make a good point, and I've seen a couple of vendors doing these. They're doing a lot more presentations talking about the back end, how we return results. And I look at just one example in our library, how before you did your search, you had to say, do I want to find books? Do I want to find periodicals? Do I want to find scholarly resources? One example I saw was it said, find, and when it returned the results, there were tabs that said, these are books, these are scholarly journals, and these are things that are in a different area. And I think that's, what you're saying is that kind of, we spend so much time thinking about our searches beforehand that when we get our results, we've missed things because we've drilled too deep up front, and at the back, we need to do that. And I think, I'm technically a cataloger, and I also work the reference desk. And what helps me a lot is when I'm helping these students find things, I'll say, this looks like an interesting article. Maybe you should go look at it. And I think that was the idea that we had with our first ILSs, we had that sample bookshelf. Remember those? The sample bookshelf, you could see virtually shelved, and I tell students, you know, back when I was in school, you kind of find something that was closed, and you kind of go browse the shelves for those things that would just jump out at you. And as you're walking through there, you find, and I think that's what we've lost, and I'm glad to see that somebody's trying to bring some of that back, that serendipitous searching, that, this is kind of fun. I wonder where I can go with this. I wonder where I can take this, or I wonder where this will take me. And I think that's a challenge we face, that we're not playing enough. We're so focused on searching and finding, we're not playing enough in our data.
I agree completely. You know, the categorization of content, you know, whether it's a book or an article or whatever other type of resource, I think, you know, since we play across a lot of disciplines, you know, I see the way that the lawyers write versus the way that some of the humanists write, and, you know, this I have to be in a book, or I have to be in an article, or it has to be a law review. You know, I think that the ultimate result, whatever that product is one of the worst ways to start off thinking about what you're trying to find. You know, and so we like to think about the ways in which you can, you know, give some sort of contextual surroundings to what you're finding. You know, I'm old enough to remember going to a card catalog and pretending that, you know, I was going to find something. And I learned a lot more walking through stacks than I ever would have in a card catalog. And so maybe that just gives me a little bit different perspective. But that end result, trying to filter for the end result up front, I think is just a silly exercise. I agree completely.
Gregg, one of the approaches that you described is the networking effect of linking together user behavior in order to expose related content. And I think this is something we talked a little bit about this morning. Can you talk a little bit about the privacy implications of those services? I mean, the library community is very focused on protecting patron privacy. And how do you balance, and this is something, there's a NISO project ongoing on this, but be interested to get your perspective on balancing the needs of patron data in order to provide those services and the need to protect the privacy of the patrons who are using those services to generate that data.
Most of the stuff that we're doing is researcher, scholar, author share data. So they know full well going in that that's what they're sharing to help aid in discovery, and oftentimes of their content. So there's a self-fulfilling prophecy there. You know, I know the project that you're referring to, Todd, and I have great respect for privacy. You know, my personal view is that you know, privacy is just kind of going out the window. I mean, and I don't mean to be cavalier about it. I don't mean to be disrespectful to privacy advocates, but you know, when I sit here and I, you know, we go through this stuff and they say, well, you know what? If you actually add in your, you know, phone number or your birthday or whatever in this seemingly innocuous form, you're going to go from, you know, 30 to 83% identification for the individual. I mean, the data that is out there and the information that's out there is scary. So I agree that privacy is a concern. I think that it's a bit of a fallacy that we're actually going to be able to keep the lid on it. The other thing that I will say is that, very interestingly, I have the wonderful benefit of dealing with, you know, the Gene Fama, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, and the, you know, brand new, freshly minted undergraduate at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York. So I see this broad spectrum. And privacy tends, from what we're seeing, to be a somewhat generational thing. We see a lot of young scholars who are open bench, open notebook, open everything. I don't even bother to tell you what my children are like with Instagram and Facebook, and well, Facebook's dead to them, Twitter and Snapchat. So I won't even go through that stuff. But I just see so much out there that the concept of privacy among young scholars that I see is arguably just gone. It's just not even possible. And I see more and more push towards that. We did a project with Josh Greenberg at the Sloan Foundation on data sharing. And you know, I had Raj Chetty, who, when he was still at Harvard before he went to Berkeley, Raj Chetty tell me that he gets the data, he does the paper, and then he puts it up on his blog and shares it. And you know, Raj, I don't know if you know Raj, but he was at 27, he was the youngest tenured economics professor in Harvard's history. And he said, I'll get other ideas. I'm not worried about sharing. That's fine. And I then had, I almost said the name, which would have been bad. I then had a professor at MIT who almost came, I asked the exact same question. He almost came across the table at me and said, are you crazy? Why the hell would I ever share my data? It's my data. So there's this very different, as we see generational change occurring where people are sharing more. I don't, you know, a few years ago I would have said it was maybe a bit foolish, but I think that that's just the ways of the world now. So they're more about building reputation and sharing than they are about cloistering information. And so I think that that's somewhat what we're seeing in the privacy aspect of it. I certainly would never ever take something that somebody did and then blatantly share it, but I'm starting to see this generational change occurring over time, and I think that's probably more impactful than what we're sharing or not sharing.
Could you add a discipline facet to that as well, as far as, you know, young versus older scholar? Does it vary? Do you see a variance by discipline that is significant?
It's actually a great question. I'm an accountant by training. And I do a bunch of stuff with the American Accounting Association and stuff like that. And let me tell you, accountants will not share anything even once it's done, because it's not really done then. So we are the most conservative set of scholars in the world. I gave a part of the keynote at their annual meeting last year, and I basically said, I don't know if you've seen the Johan Bolin clickstream data with all the dots and everything. If you look all of the way that different people share content across the different disciplines of it, accounting is non-existent. It's non-existent. Accountants write longer because they still think they need to. They don't share other than amongst themselves. And then they cloister the research tighter than anybody that I know in medicine. So that was, you don't need to listen to it. That was my talk for the American Accounting Association. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have the lawyers. We do a lot of work with legal scholars. And legal scholars will actually write a 3-page paper to put the stake in the ground at SSRN that this is my idea. So not only are they about sharing, but they're about getting that out there so that this is my idea before anybody else can claim it. It's like a land grab to them. So there's generational change and there's massive disciplinary change. The disciplinary change, I think, is actually starting to evolve in stages. I was at an AERA workshop a couple of years ago, and at that point, the head of the American Political Science Association looked at me to say that it's only about books. There's no such thing as journal articles. They don't matter in any way, shape, or form at all, at all, at all. And she then proceeded to tell me that tenure is one book published, galleys for your second book, and then you have tenure, because that was the criteria for making impactful research helpful. And we've seen a lot of change in political science, a lot of change, a lot more sharing of information, a lot more sharing of data, a lot more sharing of data, articles, and other information. Skip Lupie up at Michigan's doing a lot of stuff on the need for sharing, the importance within the social sciences of sharing, because the social sciences without sharing, without data, without replication, without reproducibility is opinion. And so we're starting to see more sharing. I don't know if it's because they're more open, but I do see more sharing in the social sciences because of, of transparency and other type of issues, that more money is going into SEM, more money is being cut out of the humanities, and close to that, the social sciences. And if we can't prove that the social sciences are providing value and that it is real research, then it's much easier to just start to hack away with the budget sword and say that it's opinion. What's the value of it? So Skip's doing some really interesting stuff. There's a number of other people doing some interesting stuff in the sharing aspect of it. But discipline is we see that in kind of chunks. It's a great question.
I think we're at time.
Great.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
And while we're swapping out mics, as I mentioned, we've got a list of potential tables here for midterm, so something in the 18 to 36 month range topics that we'll discuss. We've set up the SurveyMonkey for the live stream folks. The URL for that is very easy. It's bit.ly/NISO live. That's all lowercase. If you capitalize it, you won't get there. Just the nature of bit.ly links. But anyway, if you're on the live stream, or even if you're here and want to vote, you can do so. So that is available. You can all take a look at that. So our next presenter is Julie Zhu, who is Manager of Discovery Service Relationships at the IEEE. And again, another fantastic member of NISO and another contributor in a variety of NISO work. So thank you, Julie. And not yet. Did we turn, is it on? There we go.
Hello?
There we go.
Much better. Good afternoon. First, I have to say, please bear with me. I was in the UK over a week ago, conducting 3 discovery service workshops with UK librarians. I traveled a lot in England. Then I came back with a gift from UK. Cold, coughing. So unfortunately, it has not disappeared. So I try to work through this presentation. If I cannot, I apologize first. The title of my presentation is Partnering to Improve Library Discovery Services, a publisher's long-term commitment. So I want to first describe the goals of IEEE's Discovery Service Management and our ongoing initiatives, our efforts to improve the internal processes, and our collaborations and partnerships with discovery service vendors, and our services to libraries and industry activities. And I want to show some examples of we trying to do auditing of the IEEE content in library discovery implementations and what problems we find and how we're trying to help library improve their configurations. Finally, some future plans for IEEE discovery services. First, about IEEE. IEEE is a non-profit society. It's the world's largest technical membership association with over 400,000 members in 160 countries. 5 core areas of activity are publishing, conferences, standards, membership, and e-learning. IEEE publishes high-impact journals in the fields of electrical engineering and computing, 174 in all. It publishes close to 20,000 volumes of conference proceedings, several thousand standards. It also has online e-learning courses, and we have also host 3 collections of ebooks in partnership with Wiley, with MIT Press, and Morgan Claypool. So IEEE was among the first 4 publishers to be ODI conformant. So we're sending the complete set of our IEEE records as well as 3 ebook collections to all the 4 discovery service providers. So we're sending them IEEE journals, conference proceedings, and standards. So for several years, IEEE was aware of the challenges its content experienced in the four discovery service products. So you've heard all of them, the problems with indexing, with linking, with searching and ranking, and the problems of tracking usage, and how libraries set up their discovery services differently. So IEEE understood that to address and resolve all these problems, at least one dedicated person was needed. So they created the position of Discovery Service Relations Manager early last year with the following goals: to make the IEEE content more discoverable in all library discovery services, to improve linking to full text articles onto the IEEE Explore platform, troubleshoot library discovery service implementations, and conform to industry standards, all with the purposes to maximize IEEE content visibility and usage, advocate IEEE interests in discovery service products, and deepen relationships with libraries and discovery service providers. So I was fortunate to get that position. I joined IEEE in June last year. The first thing I did after joining IEEE was trying to figure out, understand, and map out the discovery service data flows. So as far as I understand, content comes out of IEEE first as a publisher, and the data are delivered to discovery service providers, which repackage them and make them available to libraries. And end users conduct searching in the library discovery interfaces, and then they arrive at the Explore platform for text. So these publishers, discovery service providers, libraries, users, and platform or content aggregators, they work together to form standards such as ODI and KBARD. So IEEE as a publisher has three major tasks in this data supply chain. First, it generates metadata and full text feeds and deliver them to the discovery service provider repositories. Second, they send DOIs and other metadata to Crossref. Third, they generate title lists out of the databases and send to the vendor knowledge bases. The library service providers have to work on two major areas. First, they massage the title lists received from publishers and organize them in link resolvers. They create a central index. They do some searching and ranking algorithms, and they provide full text linkings. Currently, there are three major types of linking: DOI-based linking, direct linking that Karen just mentioned. Direct linking are using the publisher-provided article IDs, and open URL linking, which is kind of like a little bit older technology. Then for the IEEE content to be discoverable, visible, and accessible, libraries have to do some configurations on their end. First, they need to select all the IEEE collections from the central index. They can prioritize some of the collections and databases. And depending on the availability of the linking options, they have to do some configurations for these linkings to make them available to their library users. To make the full text available in the discovery implementations and make the open URL working, they have to select all the appropriate relevant IEEE targets from the link resolvers. Well, we find quite a few libraries don't do that. The end users, they have some freedom about what to choose, what to search and where to search. They can search beyond the library holdings. They can search full text only. They can search, limit their search to certain collections or databases. And some discovery service products allowed end users to set up preferences so that, for instance, the results of engineering can come closer to the top. Also, depending upon the availability of the linking options, the users can choose ODI-based linking. These links go through the Crossref and get resolved on the platform for full text. Or they can choose the direct linking. The direct linking get resolved to the platform directly without any the middle parties. So this type of links work best for us. When these, the first two options are not available, the users have to choose the open URL linking. And open URL linking, for the links to work, they have to find a match for the publication title in the link resolvers. And it's more complicated and a higher failure rate. Once they arrive on the platform, to get access to the full text, they have to go through the authentication and authorization. And as far as I know, there are several major ways to authenticate: the IP authentication, using password authentication, single sign-on. The single sign-on includes Athens, Shibboleth, and Easy Proxy. Those that fail to authenticate get a login denial page. Otherwise, they get a full text. Currently, a large portion of the incoming traffic, we cannot trace where they come from. Only when all the stars align correctly, then we get like a usage coming from the discovery services. So you can see this is a very complex process. So I understand that I, as a single person, could not address and resolve all the problems. So with support from the IEEE management, I assembled a 9-person discovery service working group. We have members from multiple technical and business units. We meet regularly. We understand some of the problems come from us. We need to improve our data delivery processes. We need to improve our DOI depositing processes. And there are some problems in our metadata we need to clean up. And we need to create better title lists. And we need to analyze usage. And also we need to improve internal communications. And we realize we also need to collaborate and partner with the discovery service vendors and to discuss all kinds of issues, including, but not limited to, indexing, linking, searching, user guides, analyzing usage, etc. IEEE was the first publisher to provide quick reference guides for discovery services and the link resolvers. However, we found only 5% of our customers actually were aware of them or were using them. So we need to do a lot more than that. So we need to identify more which libraries using what discovery services, and we need to conduct site visits. We need to do some survey to find out more about our customers. We need to audit their discovery service implementations, and if there are problems, we need to help them improve. And also, IEEE needs to participate more in industry activities. So now I'm serving in the ODI and KBART working groups, and also D2D topic committee. And we try to be present as many conferences as possible. For the whole thing, we want to think systematically, try to create an architecture, try to establish as many routines as possible, and hopefully to develop a culture that it's important to have good metadata. It's important to deliver content in an effective way. And it's important to communicate internally and externally. So here are some of the results for improving our internal processes. We found there were significant content gaps for IEEE content in all the 4 discovery service products. So we discussed with all these vendors, and we re-delivered the complete IEEE content. It's about 3.4 million records to all of them to help them filling the missing content, the content gaps. We redeposited over 6,000 missing DOIs for proceedings and standards. Just last Friday, I'm very happy to announce, we released 31 KBAR 2 compliant title lists. So we're still working on cleaning up ISBNs and ISNs for proceedings, standards, and periodicals. And we are continuing to analyze referrals and usages from discovery services to understand how it works. So here's a list of the KBAR 2 compliant lists we just released. IEEE IET Digital Library, we called IEL, is our #1 subscription product. Most of our libraries subscribe to it. It includes journals, proceedings, and standards, not only from IEEE, but also partners like IET, VDE, and Bell Labs. In the past, we did not have a consolidated title list. So the vendors would have come to our website to download OPAC lists separately for journals, proceedings, standards, and ebooks, and filter out the IEL titles. And then sometimes they set up separate targets in the knowledge bases. And so that creates a problem for the vendors and also creates problems for libraries. Because when they, if they subscribe to IEL, they're supposed to select all the relevant IEL targets in the knowledge bases. And we find in many instances they do not. So with this consolidated IEL list, we hope a lot of the problems can be resolved or eliminated. So we're also actively collaborating with discovery service providers. In January of this year, we visited EBSCO. We met with a whole team, a whole room of technical and business the leaders from EBSCO, and we talked about a whole range of issues. And since then, we've been having monthly calls with them, and it's fabulous. It's fantastic working with the EBSCO folks. I want to thank Scott helping making this happen. And we're making progress in multiple areas. And in July this year, we did the same exercise with ProQuest. We visited ProQuest in Seattle. We met with the knowledge-based teams, their discovery service teams, and the product management teams. And we hope to establish monthly calls, routines with them soon. We didn't have a chance to go to visit OCLC this year, but we have started the monthly calls with them. So we are very happy that OCLC recently completed its project to re-index the IEEE content, complete content, not only the IEEE journal standards and proceedings, but also the 3 ebook collections, increasing the IEEE records in the discovery service from 1.5 million to 3.4 million. So that's a big improvement. And Xlibris actually was the first vendor that asked us to re-deliver the complete content. And they've been filling some missing content, and since then we've seen the numbers of IEEE records increased in Primo, and also the direct linking worked very well for the IEEE content. We've seen an increase of usage from libraries using Primo and Primo Central. So I want to thank all these vendors for working with us. For library service and support, early this year, we started visiting libraries in UK, New York, and Seattle to learn about their specific issues. And we conducted surveys of our library customers about their discovery service experiences. And we identified several thousands of our library customers with discovery services. And we created a discovery service Salesforce dashboard for better internal communications. And I also audited several hundred library discovery implementations and found many missing significant chunks of IEEE content. So just in UK, just over a week ago, I conducted 3 discovery service workshops in London, Bristol, and Newcastle. We met with librarians from over 20 libraries, and we kind of trained them how to audit their content and how to change configurations. So we're going to plan to reach out to them to see whether the changes result in the increased numbers of IEEE content in their implementations and increased usage of the IEEE content. We're also collaborating with libraries and discovery service providers for some research. So recently, a colleague of mine, Jalen Kelly, and I collaborated on a research paper on the content gaps in library discovery interfaces. The paper titled, Collaborating to Reduce Content Gaps in Discovery, What Publishers, Discovery Service Providers, and Libraries Can Do to Close the Gaps. The paper has been accepted to be published in the December issue of Science and Technology Libraries. The online version should come out next month. So in the study, we try to compare the IEEE, a number of IEEE records in Explore, in the IEEE feeds sent to the discovery vendors, in the discovery-based indexes, and also 24 libraries that use 4 different discovery tools. And these 24 libraries, we select some of these from the UK, from Europe, some from US, some from Asia, some from Africa or South America. Here are some of our findings. And as you can see, about half of the libraries are missing a significant amount of the IEEE 4 text articles. They are across all 4 discovery tools. The gaps are relatively small for journals, for journal papers. But you can see for at least 2 of these tools, there are a lot of duplicate records, and the numbers are higher than what IEEE actually has for the journal articles. The gaps are more significant in the conference papers. Okay, again, like half and probably more. So we try to analyze the causes of these content gaps, and we find the causes can come from all kinds of places. It can come from publishers. The publishers may somehow do not send all the content to the discovery vendors for all kinds of reasons, technical business or just oversight. Then for the discovery service providers, even though they receive the content, they may not index all the content they receive in a timely way and for all kinds of reasons. And also libraries. Well, very often the libraries do not configure their discovery services or link resolvers in the optimal way. Sometimes they fail to select the collections from the base index, central index, or they forget to update the collections when new collections are added, or they may not select all the relevant targets in the knowledge bases. So then before my UK trip, and I audited over 100 UK and Ireland libraries discovery service interfaces, and we got more or less similar results. We can all these over 100 libraries, they use three of these discovery service tools. Again, about half are mixing a significant chunk of the IEEE records. Again, the gaps for journals are relatively small, but the gaps for the conference proceedings are a lot higher. So we worked with these libraries. Again, we hope to follow up with them in several months to see whether the changes in the configurations improve the experiences. And so stay tuned. We hope to publish the next paper on this. So here are some future plans for discovery services on the IEEE side. We want to deepen relationships with all the discovery service providers. We really want to help them, work with them to develop the discovery coverage analysis tools, because right now there are just no good ways to find out all the IEEE records in one discovery tool. We've worked out some algorithms and we verify these with the vendors, but we hope there will be better tools so that not only the publishers but the libraries can easily find the content gaps and help fill in the gaps. We want to work with the vendors on track usage, and we hope we see some improvement of the ranking of the IEEE results in these discovery services. And internally, we want to continue to work on the initiatives to clean up the metadata and improve our content delivery processes. And we also want to deepen the relationships with libraries. We want to do more systematic auditing, outreach workshops, and webinars, and in more territories. And we hope to do more collaborative research with libraries and with vendors. So, thank you.
Great. Any questions for Julie?
Hi, I'm Alistair Morrison from Elsevier. I have a similar job to yours. Do you think there are areas where publishers such as us could collaborate on developing approaches to improving discovery? Yeah, it just seems like if we're all sort of reinventing these processes. Well, I mean, we're working together on like ODI, you know.
Yes, actually, it's on our agenda. It's part of the ODI group. We're trying to sort of like do a publisher initiative that we can work together and exchange tips. Yes, it's on our agenda, and definitely we should and can work together.
It's one of the true benefits of the ODI group is that there, prior to this group, there wasn't, and also KBARD, I would say, there weren't a lot of publisher staff members who were focusing on interfacing with the discovery community. You know, with some notable exceptions. I think the notable exceptions are actually maybe in the room. In order to improve the services that the libraries and patrons are receiving, and it all kind of comes back to metadata. So.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to mention that actually I received quite a few requests like yours, and I talked with people from actually the Karen, right? We talked with people from ASTM and the Springer and OECD, and actually I've received quite a few requests like that. So definitely we should work together.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Tibbetts from the California Digital Library. I'm talking now from a library perspective. Now, this is two different vendors talking about putting up library-specific guides for your customers. And as a purchaser of 500 and some products, there needs to be some way to collate those guides so that we don't have to keep going out if we've got a discovery platform to 500 sites to figure out the best way to optimize your content.
Well, that's a good thought. And but I think we want to give credit for IEEE who started the first. But since then, we've received quite a few requests from other publishers say like, oh, this is cool, we want to do that. And definitely, I think we can go do that through the ODI or D2D. And well, there's some, maybe each publisher has some uniqueness, but maybe we can figure out, okay, how to streamline.
And, Julie, sorry, this is Laura Morse from
Yeah.
Harvard, and I'm also on ODI. And the library stream does have a project in mind to start collating exactly that information as sort of a clearinghouse, because we all have 500 vendors, and the more we can do to bring this together, I think it'll help us all. So you should see some more on that in the next couple of months coming out.
We can't even put that down as a NISO should do this. We're already on it. Any other questions? If not, thank you so much, both for your presentation and for your service. Okay. And then we're going to now take a look at this sort of discovery questions from the perspective of the library community. We have with us a tag team of Michael Levine Clark, who is Associate Dean for Scholarly Communications and Collections at the University of Denver Libraries, and Jason Price, who's Director of Licensing at the Skelk Library Consortium. And they're going to be talking about some of the research that they've done on the impact of discovery services. Maybe up a little higher?
Better?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I can hear it now. So thanks, Todd. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the research we've done, but we're mostly going to talk about the research that we wish somebody would do. It may be us, and maybe NISO, maybe it'll come out of today. So about 2.5 years ago, we started a research project to look at the impact of discovery system implementation on publisher-hosted journal usage. A very small piece of the puzzle, right? There's lots of content that is in discovery systems, and we were just looking at one particular type of content. The idea was that this was going to be the first phase of a study, and we were going to look at multiple different kinds of content. And then we were going to move on from that question about whether usage was changing to the bigger question of why usage might be changing. We never really got there. We just did the first part, publisher-hosted content. We started to do aggregator-hosted content. And through that process, we had a lot of conversations with librarians, with vendors, with publishers, and among ourselves, and realized that the questions we were interested in were bigger questions. And so we'll talk about some of those questions today. I think it's important to think about goals. One of the things that's pretty clear is that from talking to librarians throughout this process, the goals of different libraries are different. So libraries, I think, probably universally would say, yeah, one of the reasons why we're doing this is to improve the user experience. But how and why that improves the user experience differs. So to provide a Google-like experience is one reason you hear for implementing a discovery system. To give one-stop shopping, because there are too many resources and it's too hard for a typical user to keep them straight. But sometimes you hear that that's really just targeted at beginners or undergraduates. Sometimes you hear that it's for everyone. Sometimes you hear that one-stop shopping is really targeted toward particular disciplines. Sometimes you hear that it's for every discipline. And sometimes really the whole point is that it's for cross-disciplinary purposes, right? That you started at a centralized discovery system because you want to look across disciplines. And all of those reasons are valid, and in many libraries, it's actually implemented for all of those reasons. And then one-stop shopping might mean primarily for articles. It might mean for articles and books. It might mean for all different types of library resources. And again, that probably varies from library to library. Another reason is to provide a single starting point for when you're not really sure where to search. So in this model, you might start in the discovery system and then ultimately end up searching in some of the more specific and specialized resources. Implementation might be to replace the catalog, and it might be about reducing the number of individual A&I databases. And that might be a goal in and of itself, and the goal also might be to reduce costs of those A&I databases, so to reduce subscription costs. And probably a bigger goal, and a sort of a scary goal, is to increase the number of users starting with the library to try to compete with Google. Right? That's a big one, pretty much an existential one. So when we start to think about these goals, we decided to think about value and impact. And there are a number of ways you can think about value of a discovery system. And the one that we started with, that our research was about, was usage. And usage is, in some ways, a tricky one, because different stakeholders are going to perceive that differently. So whether we're talking about usage as being a number of searches or full-text downloads, we don't all necessarily have the same goal, and I think that's important to recognize. So publishers clearly want their usage to go up. Right? Publishers have one slice of the pie. They want their usage to go up. They probably want their usage to go up both on their own platform and on their aggregated platform, but ideally on their own platform. Librarians want users to find relevant content efficiently, and that may mean that usage goes down, right? If somebody's finding what they need with fewer searches and faster, they're getting right to the right content, maybe usage goes down. But that's in tension with the fact that we very often evaluate usage based on cost per use, which means that we would want usage to go up. And when we talk to publishers, we very often say, well, your usage went down, so we're going to cancel. And those are in conflict. Discovery vendors need to respond to both of these needs. They need to respond to the publisher's need and the librarian's sort of schizophrenic need for up and down use. And JSTOR, I think, is a perfect example of this, right? So JSTOR, a couple of years ago, was doing a lot of work to look at usage and the impact of discovery systems on their usage. In the pre-discovery system world, JSTOR did a great job of branding themselves. Undergraduates who might not know anything else about the library knew somehow that they should start their search with JSTOR, even when they were supposed to be searching for a current topic. They might start with JSTOR and find a 5-year-old article. JSTOR usage went down in a lot of libraries after implementation because users were not searching just JSTOR. They were searching across a lot of content and finding current material. And from a library perspective, that should be fine. But there is a tension there. And that's so I think when you think about usage related to value, it's really important to recognize that usage going up is not necessarily what you want. Other components of value, effectiveness, or the accuracy of searching and retrieval, and then efficiency, the speed at which by which you get at the content that you need. Comprehensiveness, searching across a wide range of content and content types. Integration with other library tools is pretty important too. So if you're integrating a discovery system and it doesn't work well with your ILS, that's a problem right there. And again, the components of value and how you think about value are going to vary across the stakeholders. We would love to have conversation in the Q&A about whether there are some other values that we've missed. Impact. So how do you measure the impact of a discovery system? And we come back to usage, right? Usage going up or down overall is clearly a measure of impact. But as I think I've made clear in the value discussion, there's a lot of nuance there. The proportion coming through the library versus Google is really important. Again, if part of your goal is to bring users away from Google into the library, one measure of impact would be that more users are coming through your system than through Google. The proportion coming through the discovery system versus other library sources is another important way of measuring impact. publisher-hosted versus aggregator-hosted content. How is that changing in terms of a mix of usage? The proportion in terms of different types of library resources. There are print books and ebooks and articles, and then there's the previously siloed content, the digital library, special collections, primary sources, institutional repository, all of that stuff which was harder to find before and is hopefully easier to find now that it's mixed in with all this other stuff. And so all of that needs to be taken into account when measuring impact. And again, in our study, all we looked at was the publisher-hosted journal content. Some other components of impact, bringing users back to library resources or bringing users to library resources in the first place, and whether that's direct or indirect. So whether they're never getting to any library resources other than through the discovery system, or whether the discovery system leads them to the library and then they expand their use of the library. The reduction in the number of individual databases might be a measure of impact, that because you have this central search option, you don't have to subscribe to as many other things. Fewer questions about basic searching from users. So if one goal is to make it easier for users to understand where to start, maybe they don't have to ask you where to start their search. And because it's a simple search box, they don't have to ask you how to search, which perhaps frees up reference and instruction librarians to do more complex, higher level reference and instruction work. And again, I'm sure there are other ways of thinking about impact, and we'd love to hear those. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to talk about the research project a little bit.
Okay, so I'm going to wait for the green light to mean that you can hear me. Sounds like you can. So this study was done, published in 2014, but was done based on implementations of, in 2011, of discovery systems looking at the change in usage before and after implementation at the journal level. Really just one way of measuring impact. And as Michael said in his introduction, we've been thinking about how to expand that. And there are really two ways to expand it. One is to look more specifically at what's going on behind the results. Another is to expand and say, do these results matter? And we're really thinking more now about the do these results matter part. And I'll talk to that a little bit as I review some of the results. But I also wanted to mention that our third collaborator, John McDonald, was a key part of doing this work. So 4 results I want to highlight, and I'll give a little bit of a figure for each. The first is that all discovery systems did increase usage, in this case publisher-hosted journal usage, relative to the control, and the degree of increase varied from one system to another. So this is one key slide where you have a control group on your left and then each discovery system separated out. And the measure on the y-axis is the mean change in usage per journal per FTE, so adjusting for the size of the institutions. And what you could do is actually potentially put anything on this y-axis, and we think there are other things that should be put there, but it's a lot of work to put them together. And the question is, well, do we then look at ebooks, and then do we then look at the next thing, or do we ask other questions that are otherwise related to value and impact? But you can see that all 4 discovery systems did increase the usage change, so there was a greater increase in usage in those in libraries using those systems versus libraries using no systems in the control. And so it's common for a library to come and say, oh, well, this means I should use Discovery Service 3, right? Well, our answer is not necessarily. There are a lot of things behind this. This increase on publisher-hosted journals could be something about the way that discovery system works, which is not necessarily the goal of the library to increase the usage of journal articles on publisher platforms. Furthermore, even though these are different and different from each other, if you look within the library, there is as much, or within each discovery system, there's as much variation there as there is across the discovery system. So here we look at those exact same results broken down by the 6 libraries that we looked at in each condition on the 9 and the control on the left. And you can see that in any case, depending on which library you were using one of these discovery systems, you might have a greater increase in usage if that was your goal.
than another, regardless of which discovery system you use. So there's a big overlap between the top line in one and the bottom lines in the other. And these just gives you an idea how much variation there was within those libraries using the same discovery system. So a third major result, discoveries, and this is sort of was a follow-up to the study, was that discovery systems may sometimes shift usage toward the versions of the content that's on their aggregated platform. So in this case, we're just looking at the 2 discovery vendors that also have significant aggregated journal collections. And I want to point out here that, again, we're looking at libraries along the x-axis and the change in usage on the y. The numbers at the bottom, though, those are the number of journals that we looked at in that library. And we looked at only a very small specific set of journals, which are those that were both hosted on a publisher platform and the aggregated platform in that library, and both were used. And then we used a common set of journals across the 2 discovery vendors. So the point that I draw from this slide is that the patterns are relatively similar. So the white bars is the change in FTE of publisher-hosted content, and the blue bars is the change in, in usage per FTE of the aggregator-hosted content. And you can see that in both cases, there tends to be, and it's just a tendency towards where there's a difference, the tendency is toward a greater increase in usage of aggregator-hosted content than publisher-hosted content. So it's relatively interesting to me that these are different publishers across these 2 studies, obviously different libraries, but we were able to actually detect a similar pattern with a lot of variation around them. Those bars are large and overlap because those means aren't really significantly different, but a trend that's there in both these studies, which come from very different underlying data. But we've noted before and would say again that it's unlikely that this is intentional. You can think of really good reasons why the aggregator hosted content would not want to be drawing usage away from the publishers that they work with, because that would make the publishers much less interested in providing that content on their aggregated platforms. And furthermore, there's probably, we know there's a significant effect of the way that libraries set up their linking systems and prioritize resources that could allow these bars to be changed significantly based on what the library, how the library configures their resource. So the fourth and final result is that although these results are significant, we don't really know, or didn't really know, if they are important. So it's one thing to find differences that you can measure. But when you look at the proportion of the variance in usage that's explained by the discovery system, the publisher, and the library that's using the discovery system, only less than 1% of the variation in total usage is actually explained by those variables. So this is a significant result, but it's always been in my mind to ask, is it important? Do these differences matter, or is all of the other variation in usage that's caused by other things kind of swamp out the importance of these discovery system and publisher and library-based differences? So that number is always stuck there in my head saying, wait a minute, we need to know better whether these results are really meaningful. There are significant differences, but how much do they matter? So then where do we go from here? And I want to call you to engagement as part of this, because the idea of this presentation is not to talk about our study that's looked just at a particular aspect of usage, but it's really to call you into engagement with some aspect of discovery systems that you're interested in, and which one you want to talk about and learn about, and try and be involved in improving going out of this conference. So to our mind, a couple things we've learned. One, ideal questions are those that have participation by multiple stakeholders who really want to know the answer. The more we can work together on this, rather than just saying, well, the libraries are going to find this out, and so they're going to say, hey, you bad
so-and-so or you bad other group. That's not going to help, right? You want to be working together looking at things that we really want to know the answer to as a community, as members of the community, in order to make sure that these discovery systems are really working. And I think that is the key idea of this conference today and tomorrow, and how we do that is, pursuing that is really part of our goal as well. So as we were thinking through the questions that we want to talk a little bit about, just a couple of examples, there kind of came out to be two groups. One is a broader synthetic question. How much of an impact do discovery services really have? That question of, do they really matter? Are they worth our investment? Are they meeting our goals? Those questions seem to be asked a little less often than the more specific, narrower analytic questions, which might only really be important if the actual impact of discovery services is compelling. So Roger Schoenfeld, in September 2014, about a year ago, wrote a white paper that said, hey, are these things really worthwhile? Libraries, you should be asking and being able to answer that question. We agree with him that that's an important question to ask, and are suggesting that NISO and people in this group and people thinking about discovery make sure that there's a good balance between the analytical underlying explanations of why there might be differences to whether those differences are actually impacting our users and how we can improve that impact. So I'm going to pass off to Michael, and he'll just give a couple of examples of questions from each of these areas.
Mike to come back on. Okay, great. So where do we go next? Here's one question, and this is one of those broad synthetic, do these systems even matter questions? Do library discovery systems really make a difference? This is a data-heavy slide. I'll try to explain what's on here. The pie chart is one library's referrals to one publisher. So this is from a publisher referring to one library. 39% of the referrals to that publisher for the licensed content for that library come from library sources directly. So 17% come from the direct discovery system, 13% come from a resolver, 3% come from databases of various sorts, and 6% come from the library catalog. Right? So that 39% is broken down in that way. This pie chart corresponds to the third bar over with 13% and 17% coming from the discovery and link resolver. The other 5 bar charts are essentially they're pie charts that have been flipped up on end so that you can compare them, right? So these are 6 different libraries. The stuff up near the top that is bolded with bold lines around them is the stuff that's coming from the library, and it's a pretty small percentage across the board. These are from 2 different. These happen to be from 2 different discovery, or these libraries happen to use 2 different discovery systems. Not by design. These just happen to be the libraries we had data from this particular publisher for. It's not asking a more important question about what referrals lead to full text use. These are just referrals, and maybe the results would be different if it were pointing to full text use, and that would be an important question to ask. But it's really, I think, pretty important to ask. You know, if such a small percentage of users are coming from the library at all, what difference does it make if you implement a discovery system? Are users finding or accessing more relevant content through a discovery system than they are when they're coming from, or through the library when they're coming from other sources? So if you were to break down that pie and say, what are they actually accessing? Is the stuff from the library more relevant to the user? Is it better content? Is it more full text content? That would be one way of looking at this. And another question, are users who maybe had stopped using the library convinced to come back and use a discovery system when one is implemented? That's another way of thinking about this broad question. Another broad question, is Google Scholar a viable alternative to a library discovery system? And we know that University of Utrecht already decided in their minds that it isn't. to be fair, they didn't actually replace a discovery system. They replaced a homegrown article indexing tool. So they didn't drop something like Summon or Primo or EDS or WorldCat. This is 2009 data from one publisher. This is their sort of study of the comparison of Google Scholar with Summon. It's old, right? It's probably irrelevant in terms of the actual information in here now, but it's a good way of thinking about the question. You can see that there are clear ways where Google Scholar either doesn't do a particular thing or doesn't do that particular thing as well as the discovery system. So the question then is how do you take that information and use that to develop better discovery systems, to convince users that discovery systems are where to go, to work with discovery vendors as libraries and publishers to make sure that we are keeping the discovery system column full of check marks and not the Google Scholar column. So I think that there are ways of thinking about how there is a benefit to a discovery system, but part of the next step is convincing our users that that's the case as well. Okay, so now a couple of narrower questions. To what extent does library e-resource management and linking configuration limit discovery system effectiveness? So we saw in our study that there was a wide variation across libraries with the same system. And this might be one reason why, that the way that they are configuring a link resolver or the way that they are working with an ERM or whatever else might have some reason why. So it has to do with configuration, it has to do with what other resources they have available, and maybe it has to do with what other library tools are available. And if link resolver configuration is only as effective as, or is discovery system is only as effective as these other decisions, that's a pretty important thing to know. And there are a couple ways that we can study this. One is to compare libraries with the same discovery system and different configuration options. So snapshot right now, how does usage vary across those different systems as they're configured now? Another is to compare the same library or multiple libraries before and after a change in this configuration. Similar question, does discovery system configuration affect the user experience? So this is configuration of the discovery system itself. These are the sorts of things that you can go in and change. One of the things that we did in my library with Summon, for instance, early on was we said, wow, we're getting newspaper results all the time. Newspaper articles always come to the top, let's turn that off. Those sorts of decisions. Again, there was a wide variation across libraries with the same discovery system in our study. And many libraries, we think, appear not to think very carefully about this. We've heard this from discovery vendors that many of the libraries actually just implement straight out of the box. We've heard this from libraries that we've talked to that for them it was trial and error. As in our example at the University of Denver, where we, at some point pretty soon after implementation, realized that we needed to change the way we were allowing newspaper results to display. So that's an important question then too. So you could do the same thing. You can compare libraries with different configurations. You could compare before and after in a library after they've made a configuration change. You could compare before and after there's a system-wide configuration change, sort of at the broad level. If one of the discovery systems changes the way it does something fundamentally, you could compare that way as well. The major difficulty in studying this in all but that way is that libraries are often reconfigure gradually, right? It's an iterative process. And it's hard to link specific configuration choice to impact, right? We might make a choice that takes us several months to actually finish implementing. We might not even record when we made that choice. So that's a hard one to study. But I think it's pretty important. And as Julie's audit shows, those configuration choices might make a lot of difference in terms of what content is actually made visible. And then again, this sort of scary question, is there a future in search and content for libraries? This is the big question. And what happens if we cede discovery to Google Scholar? What happens if we just give up and say, Google Scholar is great, let's just work with Google Scholar? Is that a good or a bad thing for our users, for libraries, for scholarly content, for all of the sort of different reasons we should be asking that question? And then, is open access something that is actually a threat in this regard? If you imagine a world with lots of open access and Google Scholar, is that a threat to libraries, or how do libraries continue to be relevant when there's free discovery and free content, and how do you curate that? And then I guess another way of thinking about this is how maybe we should influence user behavior or change user behavior in this context to create more dependency on library resources, to keep people with library resources, to increase awareness of the fact that very often they are using library resources even when they start with Google Scholar. So hopefully we got some questions brewing for you, so thank you.
Yep.
Oh.
It's green. There we go. Yes. So, any questions? I mean, apart from the questions that they put up on their screen.
Letty Conrad with Sage. Thanks, guys. Really great. Always good to see that data. I always see something different, I think, when we talk about the impact stuff. One question I have for you is if you or anyone has thoughts on kind of picking apart some of the referral data that you got from that one publisher, as far as looking at the degrees of traffic from the library. We assume that the traffic coming from the library is authenticated, users who intend to be there, who are probably staying, whatever resources they land on, staying a reasonable amount of time. But I'm curious, just knowing from what we see at Sage, we see high amounts of bounce rates, from various Google properties. We know that direct link, no domain stuff is probably blocked, browsers. How much is it worth us talking about the value of this usage? I mean, not all referrals are built the same, so just want your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one clear answer to that is the question of whether referrals as numbers versus actual use of the full text content, viewing a full text content or downloading is really different. If it is that, I think that tells us something with regard to that. But I actually think that although this referral data is really questionable, so this takes lots of URLs and crunches them together into categories that we think make sense. But at different institutions, things are going to be different. So the blue and orange bars might need to be added up in looking at the impact of discovery, but we don't know that it's all discovery because some discovery systems can be built to go through the resolver, in which case that resolver traffic might be coming from the discovery system or it might be coming from somewhere else in the library. But I think understanding these numbers, how they vary across discovery systems and how they vary across publishers is a step in the right direction. So for me right now, the right direction is proving that these things really do make a big difference. So I think one thing I'd love to see NISO support and or just the people in this room who we are NISO to some extent, right? We are a small part thereof, but if we can get together and say, yes, we are going to find a set of publishers that are interested in doing this, and we're going to try and get some data that lets us know how important is this referral data, what does it mean? But to me, some step in the direction of saying, well, are we changing the relative level of usage? Is that the best thing to measure? Maybe not, but it's at least taking a step forward from just minor change in use differences to looking at the usage in context and asking,
if we know that there really are differences across libraries in this, we can find out, we can code a library and say, hey, here's 3 other libraries, and this is what, that use your discovery system, and they look like this, but you guys look like this. Something's going on. Let's try and help, because I think the idea of pulling together all of the individual publishers' descriptions for how you should configure discovery system A or B is a bottom-up grassroots approach, which will help some, but I think a top-down, bringing other kinds of data that might be, we might be able to do it in a way that it could really make a meaningful difference, is to motivate that and to prove that the work that we are all putting into these discovery systems is worthwhile.
Come on. I saw David's hand first.
Okay. David Prosser, Research Libraries UK. A couple of comments, if I may. I mean, it's interesting seeing that slide again. Actually, the whole presentation was really fascinating. Thank you. But that slide, I mean, you said that the proportion coming from the library was small, and it struck me that sort of like up to 40%. It depends on your definition of a small, but that sounds to me like a sizable chunk. So it's I thought it was fascinating that you described it as being small. I guess you don't know if the discovery services weren't there. You're not necessarily saying that that usage would disappear because people would find it in other ways. The other comment was about the variation between libraries, and that sort of feeds into a pet peeve of mine, which is that a lot of publishers are increasingly using usage as a proxy for value, and therefore as a proxy for price. And if we could be in the perverse situation where those institutions who take a lot of care in implementing discovery and ensuring that resources are being used actually then are penalised by being charged more for the privilege by the publishers. And so I think if we can message that in the right way to say that actually, that usage is partly as a result of the activity of the library, and it shouldn't be penalised, and that I think would be a valuable thing for us as a community to do.
Right. Yeah. So on the first topic of small amounts of use, in some ways these numbers are larger than we would expect. If you look at the last 2 bars, though, where the discovery system comes out at 3% or 2%, those are in the thin blue bars there next to the others. There are many other institutions that see their discovery system at that level, and that's where some of the ideas of the library-based usage being relatively low is there. But it is interesting to me. This is the first time I've looked at this data in this way. It seems like as those bars shrink, then other bars that are related to library increase some. So I think this is good news, but again, it's one publisher for a limited period of time, and it's just referrals. I think this is just suggestive of a direction we ought to go. Yeah, and we've seen other publisher data for at least the library that's in the pie chart, which happens to be mine. And we tend to have a higher percentage coming from the library and from all of those same components, a larger percentage than most publishers. And when they show up, when publishers have shown me the data, they've commented on that we're unusual. There are a few others that have a high percentage here too, but that's about as high as it gets, I think.
And then we have.
What was the other part of the? There was another part of the question.
The usage.
About usage.
Usage pricing based on usage.
Yeah, right. I agree, and it goes back to the whole thing that we brought up, that maybe usage going up, even if usage going up were a good thing always, it's not, I think, fair to penalize somebody for higher usage. But usage going up may not even be what we want. There are all sorts of reasons why higher usage might not be a good thing.
Did you have a question?
Marjorie Tibbetts from the California Digital Library. There's another interesting intersection that's not necessarily on this slide. For the University of California, week in and week out, Google Scholar is our second highest referrer to our link resolver. So how much of that link resolver traffic is actually coming from Google Scholar?
Right. That's a great question.
We sometimes did have Scholar
google.com as with the resolver prefix to that, and we often were able to separate that out. So I think this slide is relatively robust to that question. So this should be Google Scholar proper, and the Google Scholar that was coming from the, actually, is that right? Talking about actually, so resolver, so if you have the main Google Scholar link, you also have the Google Scholar link on the side that's provided by the institutions. Looking at the traffic from there, we actually did put that in with Google Scholar. So this is real resolver traffic, and when we were able to separate out traffic that was coming from Google Scholar as the search point, it was added into the Google Scholar part of the bar.
And not into the library.
Right, right.
All right, well, thank you. I'm sure we could talk, I love talking about data, so we could talk about data for a long time. Maybe we could organize a table about data and data issues, and we have we've run over a little bit by about 10 minutes or so. Almost 15 minutes. So why don't we do this? We'll push the break back 15 minutes and get started with the roundtables at 3:30. Yes, give you an extra 2 minutes. We do have the. Actually, can you put up on the screen that bit.ly link, which is bit.ly? Can you get a browser open? Let's see if we can do this. It's bit.ly /NISO live. The reason I want this up on the screen, yeah, okay. Log in, just any old. I often try spam@gmail.com, and sometimes it works. All right. The reason I wanted, and maybe scroll that up a little bit because I think there's 10 of them. All right. The reason I wanted to put this up on the screen is so that not everyone can read the handwriting over here. And we've typed this in. So in order, we have which discussion topics would be most interested for midterm issues. So we have standardized vocabularies, we have vendor sniping, direct transfer of bibliographic data to discovery services instead of the catalog, increased visibility of library holdings in commercial search engines, metadata quality, open access discovery, integrating archived web content into discovery services, interoperability of more or less non-text content, linked open data coexisting with vendor business models, and discovery of library data in multiple formats and retention of that material. So, those are the 10 topics that were written down. If there's something that's not on the list, we can certainly fill it in if you'd like. But more or less, each table has a number. That will be 1 to 10. There's another table, maybe 1 or 2 tables that we could use if someone has another topic. So in a self-organizing fashion, when you come back from the break, pick a table that's of interest to you, and then we'll talk about how we're going to proceed when we get back. So starting 1, 10. Sorry, we didn't number them. So we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Again, to the live stream, we'll we will be looking at the survey results in order to get the table with the appropriate video to it. So, all right, thank you.
here with the notes down here.
All right. Now we have a couple more minutes, but I want to explain to everyone sort of what's going on. It looks like as of this very moment, table number 4, which is increased visibility of library holdings in commercial search engines, will be the group that is doing the live stream, because 20% of the live stream respondents want to hear that. So table number 4 is suddenly being moved to the back. There's also been some question about vendor sniping. We thought that we thought not to recreate the panel and have everyone just, sniping at each other, because that probably wouldn't be very productive. Although maybe some might find it entertaining. I don't think that vendors would appreciate it, though. I guess the easiest way to do this is, who wrote that down? And what did you mean by writing it down? Yes.
You should have known it was going to be me.
So here, just so that people are clear about what you meant.
I have to use the microphone. Okay, what I meant is I'm getting tired of seeing vendors writing about how, look at the good stuff we're doing, and we want to do this too, but this vendor over here isn't playing very good with us. And this vendor says, we're trying to do this really good stuff, but this vendor over here that says we're not playing well with them, we are playing well with them, but they want us to play the way they want, not the way we want to play. And this is becoming very counterproductive because they're spending so much time and energy taking shots at each other instead of playing well together. And I know we as librarians want them all to play well together, but they as business people also have to make sure they're making money. And as having worked for a vendor, heaven forbid your vendors go out of business one day, you pick up the phone, you call them, and they say, sorry, that company is no longer in business. So I'm a little concerned. Is there something we can do so that we can have the vendors not taking shots at each other? And is that something maybe we shouldn't even be discussing in this venue? Maybe there's a better venue for it.
Well, there you have it. That's an explanation of what that was meant. So, in true democratic fashion, find a topic that interests you. So, one is standardizing vocabularies. That's over here. Vendor sniping would be here. Well, if there's anyone that wants to talk about it. Direct transfer of bibliographic information here. Visibility of bibliographic data in Discovery Services is back there. So number 4 is that table right in front of the camera. Five. Did we go back to this side? I can't see the numbers. 5 is over here. Okay. 5 is metadata quality. Open access discovery. Archived content is here. Interoperability of non-textual is 7. Do I have that right? Okay. Yes. 9, linked open data coexisting with vendor business models. And multiple formats is 10. So 10 got moved over to there. Does everyone have a table? Okay. Okay. So, I have to say I'm very impressed with how quickly you all organized yourselves, moved to a particular table. Self-organizing communities, I appreciate it. What's also interesting is the democratic movement away from certain topics. Now, can I get everybody's attention just for a minute? What we'd like you to do in the next hour that we have is you have a theme of midterm, say, issues related to discovery services. And by midterm, we're talking 18 to 36 months. So what kind of problems do you foresee in your particular theme? Is that data interoperability? Is it exchange? Is it file formats? Is it the interaction with Google Scholar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So identify what are the handful of issues particular to, sorry? Uno momentito. Okay.
You said we would start at 3:45.
Okay. No.
Is that okay? So you can just keep talking for 7 minutes.
We can keep talking for 7 minutes. We're going to stretch it out. One of the joys of working with video files is they're huge. So, back on track. What we want you to do, you have a theme, think about that theme, think about what are issues specific to that theme. Identify the issues, hopefully actionable issues, things that there could be something done about. There's many issues that we've discussed and that we could discuss, some of which are not really appropriate for NISO, some of which are not really realistic in terms of achieving. Maybe that's why no one's sitting at this table. But ideally what we'd like is each of the tables to report out on what those themes and issues were, and potentially, is there anything you think we can do about it? Okay, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is fill up that list of what can NISO do about it? What can NISO achieve? What can we as a community achieve to improve these services for the publishers who are creating content, the discovery service providers that are dealing with these issues, and then also how can we improve the service to to the library patrons? So, with that in mind, does anyone have any questions? Just kind of extend this out for a couple more minutes. Does anybody have any questions about what we're asking you all to do? Seem pretty straightforward? Well, we're recording this. So, but first of all, would every table, ideally, can have a note taker, a reporter? So, amongst yourselves, point out the person who has the best handwriting or the best presentation skills. Ideally, at the end of this, what we'd like is the reporter to come up here and just say a few words about a summary of what you've all discussed. In an ideal world, if you could create those documents in an electronic format that could be sent to us. I know, I'm getting picky. Or alternatively, if you have nice handwriting, you can just give us a piece of paper and we can transcribe them. Because we do also want to create a kind of narrative report of this meeting and produce that as well as the white paper. So A, for each table or reporter, be someone who's willing to stand up and just say, this is what we talked about for 45 minutes to an hour. And someone who's not shy about being on a camera. Any other questions? No? Okay. There we go. You have your task. Let's go at it. If you guys need anything, just raise your hand or throw something. We'll pay some attention to you. Okay? All right. Great. Let's go. Oh, one more just little note. We have posted all of the presentation slides already on the NISO website for this event, so they're all publicly available. I noticed a few people taking pictures of the slides. That's fine, but you know, the presentations are already up and available, so you can get access to them even now if you'd like. Okay? All right. Thanks. One special bit for you all. You have 2 mics. If you have something to say, just speak into the mic because they need the mics to hear you. There is a note. There's like a live stream social aspect to the. There's like a IRC channel that's associated with the live stream. We can get some of that as well. What I'll do is I will ask them to kill the mics in the room, so it'll still go out over the over the network. But if you grab it. Anything? Any other questions? I mean, there's more or less there's just a camera and they're watching you guys and listening to what you guys are saying. Yes. So, excuse me.
Right. That's why I wasn't sure if you were going to get in the IRC with them.
Yes, right. We're not talking to them in any way.
I'm not clear. I think they're going to try and give us the ability to dial in. Yeah, Hey Todd,
yes.
Does Nettie have access to the IRC? Or the IRC Lite?
I'll get Juliana over here. She does.
So we need a note taker / presenter. I don't know if that has to be the same person or not. So since I've already spoken today, I will opt out.
I'm messy handwriting.
Does anybody?
I don't mind taking notes.
Okay.
I'm happy to present.
Okay.
Or Jeff.
No,
Jeff will give you the opportunity.
I know.
You can do rock, paper, scissors.
Well, since you're going to present, you can start us off. I don't even know how we're starting off.
Well, I think that the...
That's the way it's going to work. You won't be able to hear. It's just going to go into the screen.
Oh, really?
Right, because otherwise everybody else will be confused by it.
Right. Juliana is going to be our tether to the world.
Yeah, so this is in case like, they have questions.
So both microphones work. Okay. Okay. That's all right. That's quite all right. We need to get the logistics down. Well, so I think that we need to start with the themes and the issues, right? Is kind of what it comes down to. So we're talking about increased visibility of library holdings and commercial search engines. And go ahead.
And maybe we want to define the terms, commercial search engines, that's probably the easy one.
Yeah.
And library holdings, that one's more complex. And
It is more complex.
So.
Yeah, I think, right from the get-go, it'd be, you start with, when we say holdings, are we talking about holdings of a work, a manifestation, right? What are we actually saying that we're going to, you know, have holdings for?
Right, and I'm hoping we would potentially expand that beyond holdings that would be traditionally registered in a library catalog and often then synced with WorldCat and available to some extent in that way, beyond that to other content that the libraries have and might want to expose via those search engines. So I don't know, articles, so almost it's like the issue for me, and I'm not sure that's where the table wants to go, and I know the folks online voted for this one, so I don't want to take it too far away from library holdings, but to me, I think in order to make discovery services relevant, we have two options to get users there. We have the option of trying to convince them to start there, or the option of having them start there and then end up somehow using a discovery system. So if they are drawn in somehow by commercial search engines being aware of those holdings and then somehow drawing the user back into library resources and library discovery systems, that's an important second path that I think we might want to think about.
So in this case, commercial discovery services is defined as Google.
Not discovery services. So there's commercial search engines, right? So when I think of Google, there's Bing and there's others. But because the majority of our users start their research in a commercial search engine, how then do they get to our traditional library holdings, which I think we have some experience with mainly through WorldCat at this point, as far as I know, but then also to other library holdings, anything the library is paying for to some extent is how I would like to expand the discussion to include not just catalog records, but broader set of things.
Would you expand that beyond what the library may hold into what the library may curate?
Right. Yeah, I think it is anything the library wants to provide access to, right? So however the library defines its holdings is, I think, what we're talking about here. You know, if you think about the goal of discovery being to get your users to the content that they need for whatever research project or class assignment that they're working on, but we also know that they're starting with Google and not starting with the library website. Ideally, Google would get them to everything, and it would get them to the library stuff. However you manage to do that is the tricky
because
part.
it could be a collection of something. I mean, it could be a database, a local database that a library holds. I think I was talking with somebody from UCLA they've got a big archive of news feeds that they've collected. Now that turns out you actually have to use them on campus, but it could be that you know, just knowing that exists, it wouldn't necessarily be the individual discrete items within it, but it could be at you know, if you look at the Google model, it's a combination of low-level items and large-level themes, or you know, it could be genres, it could be types, it could be all different kinds of formats.
Okay, so for the live stream, I'm just going to reiterate that we're talking about increased visibility of library holdings in commercial search engines. And now we're trying to define what those terms mean. So what library holdings means and what commercial search engines means. And we think that commercial search engines is essentially Google and Bing. And maybe that's about
80%, 85%.
Yeah. And then library holdings is, I think, a trickier one, and we're going to tease that out.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've been working on for the last year and a half is focused around this visibility. And one of the key points has been, with WorldCat, there's been a level of trying to understand library data within Google, Bing, and others, mobile interfaces and such, like Ido talked about earlier today. But one of the statements that was made, and kind of an opportunity here, is if libraries' catalogs, for example, were harvestable today, the engines could actually come in, start to use those. And when we've had those discussions with them, the first place they go to is, can you give me live access to all of these folks' resources? They want to be able to, similar to a movie theater, be able to represent real-time holdings or real-time access. And so it's kind of an evolution and an opportunity when it comes to things like BibFrame and whatnot. We've started to talk about vocabularies, and archives is another one that's right on the cusp of it. So relative to one of the other points that we were talking about today, which is what something NISO could do, extending BibFrame beyond MARC, those types of things to make sure that that full view of whatever we call the collections is an opportunity maybe for NISO, just to sort of throw that out there. So it gives a vocabulary that you can put out there to the web. You can translate to something like schema.org, and the individual libraries can actually say, this is what I've got, or their providers can do it on their behalf, is one thought that's come up in the research we've been doing. So. Any thoughts on that?
And we are just talking about holdings and not availability.
Right, initially. Yeah. But I think the exciting thing about it long term, what we've found is when we talk about commercial search engines, very quickly it's starting to turn into Cortana, it's starting versus Bing. Mm-hmm. So Cortana lives inside of the OS. It's turning into mobile search where, I land someplace, and if I've landed in a city that's got an archive nearby regarding a topic that I'm interested in, I think Ito used the example, I'm walking by the library and it says my holdings are available, or my book's available. Mm-hmm. Same sort of thing could happen if I'm a researcher nearby a special collection I wouldn't have seen otherwise. So how do we make sure we're injecting all of that into the web, basically? So there's certainly commercial related issues for licensed content and those kinds of things too.
So then one of the first issues that comes up is, how do they create the data, and outside of or from an ILS, for example, that might not support exporting the data in the right format, and then is there a need for a third-party service in the middle that does some of that for them, or is it you're all going to be dependent upon the vendors of all those systems to be able to deliver on the code that does that?
So I think that's a good question about capability and where does the capability reside to actually make a difference here. I come from JISC and Neil Grindley from JISC. We've been talking to OCLC recently and hearing about all the stuff you've done with SEO and schema.org. That's come from OCLC's own initiative, is it, or has it come from pressure from libraries?
We did that a long time ago. Jeff would probably know the history better than I would, I believe. But it's been going, 2006 was when we launched WorldCat.org. I think the holdings themselves, I'm not sure when that particular part of the feature made its appearance. I mean, was it from the beginning? Yeah. Right. We actually go in. Well, we know what the holdings are, and we represent them in a way that a user can actually go and click through to get to them, but they're not represented. What you're saying is in a way that they could be consumed.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of there's two models in place. So to your point, one was the way that WorldCat.org was designed would be if you were able to say collectively, here's where all the world's libraries are, and then you optimize that site to try and drive traffic in. The other option that could be a complement is that the libraries themselves have their data out there, and so someone could get to it either direction. So for example, in Boston, there were a set of students who could get anything across their consortia, but instead of having to know how to use each of those libraries, they found content on WorldCat.org and could then, as Mike said, locate items from across the consortia that they could get access to using WorldCat.org instead of using 10 different sites. So that's kind of a direct-to-consumer model. An alternative would be that if those 10 sites also had their data out in a form that Google or others could actually understand it, you could end up with a complement. So you have one that's a direct-to-consumer site, the other that sits inside of engines, such that if Cortana is my research assistant and I'm able to say, I'm researching this topic, it knows my history, it knows all about me personally, and it starts to knit together things. So both kind of complement one another there. Does that make sense, Stan? that's where schema.org, for example, is an interesting opportunity, back to the NISO side. Schema.org is a commercial engine vocabulary, so there's opportunities for bridging to that, but there's also an opportunity to make sure we're describing it thoroughly enough that we can use it inside of our own systems within our own industry, and then able to crosswalk over into Open Graph, into all these other different systems. The schema is there today, but something else will be there tomorrow as well. So, and all of the vendors have got schema. By vendors, I mean Google, Microsoft. They've got schema, and then they extend it. So they have their own versions of schema that there's a baseline, but then they extend it further. So if you're working with Google Scholar, you might have additional things. If you're working with Microsoft Education or Classroom, you might have additional things. So there's an opportunity for us to do a lot of crosswalk work there. I think that's a standard type activity.
Yeah, and using schema.org, we exposed work level data, right, at the work level. Did not on the holding side. Is that But we detect basically on the WorldCat.org search. We detect the IP. We know which libraries actually hold it, and we give them the ability to be able to click through and find it in the catalog on the other side to check for availability. Yep. And that's a once you get into the mode of having to interoperate with third-party systems, there's the potential for could be bad metadata, could be bad knowledge about what the holdings actually are. And so that creates a barrier there from ultimate, most efficient use.
Well, and one of the things I was curious to throw to the table, in terms of the short-term problems, it seems like licensed content, anybody want to opine on